This could be a 5-star. I'm gonna say it right now. It might be a 5-star. I have a goal in mind. Like, I have an ending that I find would be very satisfying for me, but we'll see if Rachel Harrison agrees with that. I'm a liar. I think I said hello and welcome to a week-long vlog in which I read 3 horror books on the top of my TBR. If you're new here, I'm Leandra the TBR0 and I have been inspired by Kirsten over at the Reading Nymph. She tends to do cozy weekly vlogs every single week. It's among her staple content for her channel. So if this is something that you really enjoy, a concept that you love to consume, definitely go check out her channel because you'll be guaranteed at least one video every single week dedicated to that concept. This is very new for me, so we're gonna see how it goes. I don't typically have slice of life content in my vlogs, so I'm not really sure at the moment as I'm recording this if that's gonna happen. You'll be just as surprised as I am, but for now, the main focus is to get these 3 books off of my TBR because I've been dying to read them. The first book that you'll be watching me read is Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze. It is the most recent new publication on this list, and it's one that BookTube is going crazy about. I just talked about this in my most recent TBR video with the intention of reading it in August, and most of the comments were so excited for me. They absolutely loved this book, or it's a book on their own TBR, and so I'm really excited to finally get to it, especially because I've never read anything by Chuck Tingle before. Another really well-loved book by this author is Camp Damascus. I meant to try it a couple months ago for the Amazing Readathon, didn't get to it, and it looks like his newest book is going to be my first experience with him. It's also perfect timing because I know that the Not Your Mom's Boozy book club is currently reading it for this month, and that's hosted by Bree and Cal. I'll make sure to have them linked below in case you're interested in checking them out, their book club, as well as the reading sprints that they host while they're reading it. But what is this book actually about? Let's read the inside flap. Misha knows that chasing success in Hollywood can be hell. But finally, after years of trying to make it, his big moment is here, an Oscar nomination, and the executives at the studio for his long-running streaming series know just the thing to kick his career to the next level. Kill off the gay characters for the algorithm in the upcoming season finale. He refuses, but soon realizes that he's just put a target on his back. And what's worse, monsters from his horror movie days are stalking him and his friends through the hills above Los Angeles. Haunted by his past, Misha must risk his entire future before the silver screen horrors find a way to bury him for good. After I finish Bury Your Gaze, I'm not really sure which book I'm gonna go to next, but another one I'm hoping to tackle this week is The Z Word. This is from a debut author, and her name is Lindsay King Miller. It looks as though it's inspired by the Pride Parade, and of course it has zombies. On the internal flap, right after the title page, it has a beautiful little tagline that says, "For the queers who threw the bricks and the ones who carry the torch." This is also a new publication. It just came out this summer. Another title I meant to get to back during the Amazing Readathon, but just couldn't squeeze it in. And actually the reason why it's in my possession and not a library book is thanks to Brittany over at Rescues and Reads. She gifted this to me off of my bookshop wish list, and I am so grateful to her. I have really great feelings about it. It looks great. And actually I'm hoping to jump on the bandwagon with Carly from Bookish Pixie Reads. She picked it up last week and she just has kind of been slowly reading it. She's been enjoying it, but she did invite me to join her if I wanted to. So we'll see if I can jump in and get to talk to her about it as both of us are reading. I'm not sure if she's finished it yet, but like, honestly, I'm in love with the cover, and I'm sure the back is also gonna make us fall in love too, in a kind of scary way. Probably. A scrappy queer found family comes together to fight corporate greed, political corruption, gay drama, and zombies. I think this is gonna be so cute. It feels a bit more camp horror to me, which is a subgenre in horror that I've been wanting to investigate more. Chaotic bisexual Wendy is trying to find her place in the queer community of San Lazaro, Arizona, after a bad breakup, which is particularly difficult because her ex is hooking up with some of her friends. And when the people around them start turning into violent, terrifying, mindless husks, well, that makes things harder, especially since the infection seems to be spreading. Now, Wendy and her friends and frenemies, drag queen Logan, silver fox Bo, sword lesbian Aurelia, and her wife Sam, mysterious pizza delivery stoner Sunshine, and oh yeah, Wendy's ex-girlfriend Leah, have to team up to stay alive, save Pride, and track the zombie outbreak to its shocking source. hopefully without killing each other first. Packed with action, humor, sex, and big gay feelings, the Z Word is the queer zombie romp you didn't know you needed. I'm so excited. Can you tell? I've chosen these 3 books because I am dying to read them. And then finally, the book that is the most well-read in this community because it has the oldest publication date is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This is also going to be my first experience with this author. I know that she's very well known. She wrote Black Sheep, a cultish classic kind of book, and a few others that are kind of escaping me. Maybe Sharp Teeth, Such Sharp Teeth. But I am very excited to read this because I think this is going to be campy as well, featuring witches, maybe seances. And what was really serendipitous is I was back up in New York visiting family, and we went to a local bookstore. We actually just got a new Barnes & Noble in the area, which was very exciting because typically a Barnes & Noble for us is like 30-45 minutes away. So it's slightly closer, and it's just honestly was lovely to go with my parents and get excited about the fact that we have more accessibility to books in the area that I came from. And I noticed that there were quite a few of these on the shelf, and I was thinking, you know what? I know so many people who have adored this book. I'm pretty sure Lotta from Lotta's Nook says it's one of her favorites. I think Mikala from Mikala Reads also really enjoyed this when she read it. I think this is an author she typically enjoys. And when I was looking at it, I realized there was something special about this particular copy. It has Rachel Harrison's signature in it. She has apparently signed all of the books from this particular Barnes & Noble because she is from, or at least currently living in upstate New York, and that's where I'm from. And I guess she just goes around to the semi-local Barnes & Nobles in like the grand area of where I live, or where I'm from actually. And she does, you know, author signings, question and answer sessions, and yeah, we'll make sure that every Barnes & Noble in the area has signed copies from her. And I couldn't not buy it, especially because the Barnes & Noble employees were so excited to talk about this opportunity, because you just don't expect that where I'm from, for there to be authors that are so well known. So I have to honor my area hometown and read this book during this vlog. The back says, a darkly funny, frightening novel about a young woman meeting a witch who might be too good to be true. All her life, Annie has played it nice and safe. After being unceremoniously dumped by her longtime boyfriend, she seeks a fresh start. Annie accepts a new teaching position and moves from Manhattan to a small village upstate. She's stunned by how perfect and picturesque the town is. The people are all friendly and warm. Her new apartment is dreamy too, aside from the oddly persistent spider infestation. Then Annie meets Sophie, beautiful, charming, magnetic Sophie, who takes a special interest in Annie and wants to be her friend. More importantly, she wants Annie to stop apologizing and start living for herself. That's how she lives. Annie can't help but gravitate towards the self-possessed Sophie and begins to spend more and more time with her, despite the fact that the rest of the townsfolk seem a little afraid of her. And like, okay, there are some things. Sophie's appearance is uncanny and ageless. Her mansion in the middle of the woods feels a bit unearthly, and she does seem to wield a certain power. But she couldn't be. Could she? Yes, it seems that I do lean kind of campy, cutesy horror, and I'm totally fine with it. I think this is going to lean in the same kind of humor, maybe some dry wit, but also the kind of witchy vibes that I'm looking for. And I think that all 3 will be great compliments to each other and won't feel too weird to all be in the same vlog. But you know what? We're gonna find out together. So on that note, let me get started with Bury Your Gaze.
We will be reading Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. I've heard that the audiobook is fantastic, so I'm very excited about that.
It is Tuesday of this cozy horror vlog, and I'm on page 90. I stopped in the middle of a chapter just as our main character was going to be entering his 20th year reunion, and I'm imagining things are going to go down. So I thought, let's stop here at about a third of the way through the novel and catch you up on what my life has been like, how I'm feeling about this book. And I didn't end up giving you any updates yesterday because Mondays tend to be really busy work days for me. I work for She Done It, a podcast dedicated to Golden Age detective fiction, and I also work for a library. So I'm just running around all day, and the best I can do on those days is usually listen to an audiobook. The audiobook that I finished yesterday was actually The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. That's for a different vlog, so I can't tell you my thoughts about it, but it is to come. Meanwhile, I then today had a relaxing morning, was able to pick this bad boy up, and I also spent 6 hours on sprints like I do every Tuesday, but I had a friend this time, Margaret the word nerd, so she kept me company while she was editing. I was reading this and also kind of doing other productive tasks, but the main thing was I got a third of the way through. So let's dig into this. The inside flap is super accurate to the vibe and narrative structure of this book. Misha, our main character, he is up for an Oscar, which is very exciting, but at the same time he has been offered this ultimatum that he must kill off his two gay characters, or he has to change the narrative to make them just be straight, because the algorithm is requiring that of him. So he is about to prepare for a legal battle that may cost millions of dollars for him to simply feel that he has defended his own creative agency, or is he going to succumb to the industry and basically keep his job, keep his well-being, and be able to create more works at this studio. Meanwhile, after this big meeting of him basically giving the executives the FU like he should, he begins to realize that he's being stalked, as are his friends. Was that as loud as I think it was? Let's start over. He begins to realize that he and his friends are being stalked by the creature features that he created in his earlier career. These monsters that are based on old films that were either really successful or really not successful. And he is starting to realize that he has to play by the rules. He knows how these stories end. He wrote them. And so he's got to kind of be smarter than the monster to ensure that he and his friends end up surviving. Meanwhile, there's all these really strange things happening. The fact that these monsters are also arriving in daylight at a diner of all places with all of these witnesses, and because it's Hollywood, everyone thinks, oh, it's just really great makeup, and at the moment that's what he and his friends think, that it's just this big group of people who are working together, either hired by someone or just on some type of weird mission to terrify them. And you're starting to wonder, how real are these monsters? This is very digestible, to the point where I am speeding through this physically. I don't have the audio, and I'm actually really enjoying that experience. I've heard the audio is great though. So if you're someone who's a big audio reader, I think that this could probably really work for you, especially if you enjoy the kind of horror that is leaning into the tropes, making fun of it, questioning it, having a lot of social commentary, and being very self-reflective. That is my favorite thing. Hence why one of my favorite horror franchises is Scream, because that's something it really leans into. So I am actually really enjoying this. I'm very glad that I'm finally reading it, and I'm kind of sad that I didn't start it sooner because I'm having such a good time, and this could be a 5-star. I'm gonna say it right now. It might be a 5-star, but for now, the rest of the evening, I'm probably gonna read more of this. However, I've got some cleaning to do, and the only audio I have for the 3 books I want to read for this vlog is Cackle. So I might have to start the audio for Cackle and juggle both of these reads throughout this week. I also just decided to do an impromptu buddy read with Danni, and we're going to be reading Hounded by Kevin Hearn. This is something she's got to read for a secret project of her own, and I just decided to join her because that's what friends do. However, I am a little bit nervous about this book. It's a series I wanted to read for quite some time because it looks really fun. However, I didn't realize this until I started kind of thinking about the author's name and being like, I recognize him, and I realized that I DNF'd a book that was co-written by him and Delilah S. Dawson. It was called Kill the Farm Boy. Brittany and I tried to read it together, and neither of us were really vibing with it. However, I've read good things by Delilah S. Dawson in the past. She wrote this great sapphic horror called Bloom. It's a novella. Highly recommend that. It's very on par for the theme of the vlog we're going for, so add that to your recommendations list. Yeah, anyways, that's what I'm gonna be doing this evening. I'm gonna be starting that buddy read, probably starting Cackle on audio, and then we'll see if I continue. I really want to, but I might have to hold this off and return to it tomorrow. I also completely forgot to mention that in Bury Your Gaze, there is a death in the first chapter, and I love when that happens, especially for horror. One of my favorite things is either slow burn atmosphere or give it to me straight. Have someone die right off the bat, we know what's about to happen, and start the body count immediately. So like, basically I'm two sides of the spectrum, and Bury Your Gaze is the one where it's like, hey, people are gonna die, let's do this. And I'm like, okay, I'm here for it, Chuck Tingle, let's do it. Before you ask, no, I haven't read any more of Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze. I've been really distracted. I only have this as a physical read, and I didn't want to force myself to keep reading it when I've been in the mood for other things. So what I have been doing is reading other books. I'm currently reading 5 books at the moment. 3 of them aren't for this vlog, so it's just been kind of a mess. It's not too unsurprising for me to have 5 books on the go, but it does feel like a lot at the moment because 4 of them are physical reads and only 1 is an audio or immersion read. So it's all been slow going, but I'm enjoying every single book I'm reading, which you don't always get to say. The reason why I'm providing you this update is because I did pick up Cackle. This is one of the 5 books I'm reading, and I've actually passed this one by. I'm only about a third of the way through this, and I'm already 50% through Cackle. What I was saying before, how I do have an audiobook for one of these books, it is Cackle, so I am immersion reading it, and I think that's partially why it's going by so quickly, but it's also just very accessible. The language, the dialogue, I can understand why you'd be able to sit down and just read it for hours, finish it in a day, even if that's the type of reader you are, because it's been so easy and digestible, which I really love, and I think we need to praise more in the book community when something is an easy, comforting read. And with that said, to compare these 2 books for a moment, I'm not finished with either of them, but I feel very confident that there are a different type of mild horror. What do I mean by that? Well, I would categorize this as cozy horror, and I think Bury Your Gaze is camp horror because they provide slightly different vibes. This one is a bit more self-referential, leaning into some of the tropes, acknowledging a lot of the well-loved franchises in the horror community, and it's also still quite dark. Like, we've got some serious social commentary going on. Also, people are dying. There are some terribly creepy moments in this where I'm just like, if I were you all, I would just be leaving town and not looking back because I am scared. Meanwhile, when it comes to Cackle, I've never been scared. There have been creepy vibes. There's been a lot of atmospheric tension, some nods to witchy activity, but it's actually a bit more mild than when it comes to Bury Your Gaze, and it's a bit more wholesome too. We see that our main character is dealing with some personal issues, trying to grow as an individual, her confidence, her love of herself, her appreciation of herself, and her ability to be alone and be comfortable with that. I do really appreciate that, and I should get into what this book is actually about. So with Cackle, we follow Annie. She has been living in New York City for a number of years with her boyfriend, Sam. She was expecting a ring at one point for them to get married. She saw him as her forever, as her end game. But he felt a bit differently, and he shocks her in telling her that he thinks they need to end things because they feel more like friends at this point than lovers. And while he still loves her, he's not in love with her. And the way he phrased it is that he kind of suggested she should already be on board. Like he kept saying we should come to terms with this. We should acknowledge this. We are better friends. And I'm like, take that word out of your mouth, because Annie was not feeling that way at all. And so I feel like he's belittling her and kind of almost gaslighting her, thinking that she should have been prepared for this. She should have been seeing the signs, when in reality, he obviously wasn't providing enough open communication and letting her know how he was feeling, because she genuinely was not prepared for this. What's really interesting about this book is I've realized that there is a very specific plot device that I tend to really enjoy in books, and that is when someone has been in a serious long-term relationship with someone and then it ends abruptly, and that person has to go on a journey to figure out how they can be happy by themselves, what kind of joy they can see in the world through their own experience, and not be dependent on someone else for their happiness and for feeling loved. And that's what this book seems to be about. That's probably why I'm also feeling like it's a bit cozy, because you can tell that that is always at the forefront of Annie's mind. But basically what has happened so far, 50% in, is that she has moved out of New York City and into the countryside that is upstate New York. A lot of people don't know this, especially if you're not from New York State, but most of New York is actually very rural and suburban. There are a handful of cities, but we always think of New York City when we think of New York, and it's like that is only a small portion of what the state of New York actually looks like. I'm biased because I'm from upstate New York, which is actually really lovely that I get to read this, because it's just reminding me of my own hometown, my own experience growing up in upstate, and I do miss it. It's a really great place to grow up and to live. Not that I'm hating where I'm living now, but you know, you feel the nostalgia. On that note, I'm also appreciating the fact that at the beginning of this novel, before Annie leaves the city, that New York City isn't described as this idyllic place. Yes, it's a place of opportunity, and there's so much diversity, and there are so many items, food, culture, experiences that you really can't get anywhere else, or at least not as easily. So New York City is lovely, but it's not perfect. It's dirty. There's a lot of people all up on top of each other. The cost of living is out the wazoo. So I understand why people love New York City, but I also wish that you saw the kind of the grittiness of it more in books. And maybe that's just because I have so many friends who live in New York City, and they are like honestly always telling me I should move to New York City. I probably get a couple offers a year because I know so many people there, and I really want to live close to them because I love my friends, but we got to come to terms with it. I don't think I'm a New York City person. So there we have it. So that was a breath of fresh air, on top of the fact that we get to enjoy this village life, the lifestyle of baked goods and people making their own crafts, being hospitable, having small local businesses. But also, Annie has met a friend, and this friend is helping her get over Sam in some quasi ways. This friend's name is Sophie, and she does seem to have the entire village wrapped around her finger. She's charming, gorgeous, thoughtful, a great listener. So Annie assumes these are all the reasons why she's just the star of the village, but then she begins to realize that Sophie has some secrets of her own, that the reason why people act the way they do to Sophie might also come from fear, some reverence, and awareness that if they don't, there could be consequences, because Sophie is a witch. I am actually really enjoying that dynamic between the two of them, and I'm wondering where the narrative is going, especially because I think Sophie has made some really great points about Annie's life, her dependence on Sam, how she's trying to get over Sam, and how she is viewing herself, her own self-worth. But because Sophie's also a witch and, you know, isn't all good, she does some things that aren't super kind. I'm wondering how we're going to interpret it by the end of the book. I have a goal in mind, like I have an ending that I find would be very satisfying for me, but we'll see if Rachel Harrison agrees with that. For now though, it's very cozy. It's getting me into the autumnal atmosphere, which is lovely. So I understand why a lot of people pick this up and should pick this up leading into October, November, getting into all of the fall vibes. Well, I need to continue reading, so I'm gonna go do that. I think I'm gonna just keep listening to Cackle because I also have to return the audio to Libby in 2 days. And by saying I have to, it will be taken from me. I have no choice. So this will be my priority today. And then I can finally return to Bury Your Gaze. Oh my gosh. I am getting ready for sprints in honor of Pick Pongathon 3.0 because I'm a mod for that readathon hosted by Krystal, and I needed to pause and make sure I provide you with an update before I keep reading, because my intention is to continue reading and possibly just dedicate most of my day to Bury Your Gaze. But first, I ended up, as I predicted, finishing Cackle, and for this one I might have to just hold off on thinking what my rating's gonna be, because there are so many elements that I really enjoyed about this. I understand why it's really well loved. It is a cozy touch of horror. Most of it's more just kind of supernatural and autumnal, but there are some dark moments, you know, moments in which our main character Annie is afraid. So that's why I acknowledge that there is a touch of horror in these pages, but it's far cozier than I anticipated. I was expecting a bit more camp and a bit more darkness, which is totally fine. This has its place in the horror genre as well. And I also really loved some of the themes. I love the emphasis on found friendship, on how important friendship is, especially in the face of romantic coupling. I think that a lot of times we see, and not just in the romance genre, but in any book that has even a romantic subplot, that characters suddenly drop everything and their main focus is the blooming romance or the long-term romance they're in, and that's totally fine. That is something that's important to a character, important to a person in real life. But there is a lot of discussion nowadays about how when someone enters a relationship, a romantic relationship, they're a serial romantic as well, where they just jump from one boyfriend to the next, or one girlfriend to the next, one partner to the next, and they end up failing to have really deep friendships with others, companionships that often outlast these romantic relationships if that ends up happening. And Annie is realizing this with Sophie throughout the book as she's still coming to terms with the end of Sam, her relationship with Sam, I should say. He's not the end of Sam, so dramatic, but his ending of their relationship and also the language surrounding it. I will say that that also ends up being a I loved this but situation, because I wish that there was a bit more texture, a bit more depth to this crisis that Annie is going through, this huge change in her life. It felt a bit surface level, especially the extremes of her reactions. I wanted her to just have a bit more sense and also defend herself a little bit more with words, not just with certain links to magic and like supernatural abilities that she ends up kind of becoming in tune with thanks to her connection with Sophie. I loved the ending. I'm glad it ended the way it did, because I was worried. I wasn't sure if I could trust this author in ending with the themes I wanted in mind. And the reason why I'm not sure about my rating so far is because I was so much more invested in Sophie. Whenever there was a scene with Sophie, I have the same sentiments that Sophie has about a lot of beliefs that we have surrounding romantic relationships and where they should be in the priority totem pole. And also the fact that she focuses on herself, her own happiness, her own needs, her desires, her passions, her goals, and making sure that she protects herself, especially when someone else is trying to take too much from her or harm her physically, emotionally. So I am kind of wondering what that's about. The fact that I actually was more invested in Sophie and wasn't as invested in Annie, the main character who we were following the entire book. She also was just a little bit too silly for me. I felt like Annie was a bit of a goofball, a bit of that kind of classic quirky character, which we see a lot in cozy. So again, this is very much in the cozy subgenres. But for me, I can have goofy characters grate on me if they're written in a certain way. On top of that, she drank a lot in this book. There was a lot of alcohol, and I'm kind of wondering where that was coming from. I know she was depressed. I know that she was going through a bit of a crisis turning 30 as well, which people do. I also think that we need to end that taboo. I do wish that the touch of alcoholism, we'll say, was handled a little bit better, especially just in acknowledging that it's not healthy, that's not a good way to cope. But it just seemed to be kind of thrown under the rug, especially at the end when they just continued to like enjoy, you know, consuming wine, which I drink wine, I drink beer, I drink cocktails. Like, I'm not someone who is against all of that, but I feel like there's an importance of like making sure that it's depicted appropriately, or at least like the right tone is provided for the consumption that we're seeing in the pages. And finally, I have returned to Bury Your Gaze. I'm about halfway through this book, and I actually just got the audio. It came in yesterday while I was at work, and I borrowed it because someone is waiting on this physical copy. My library system only has one copy, and it's currently in my possession, and someone's waiting on it. So I was thinking, depending on how I feel about the audio, I'm more than happy to switch to it, send this off on its way so that someone in my area can enjoy this book too, because I feel badly when I'm just like holding on to it and I happen to have access to an ebook, an audiobook, or other means of reading this where someone else might only be reliant on our physical library. So my next shift at the library is in a couple days. I'll be returning this then. We'll see if I even like matters, because the audiobook is going at a nice clip and I've been immersion reading. I went on a walk this morning listening to it too, so I've just kind of been switching around. So it probably is a moot point, and I could have just returned this yesterday, but it's fine. I am still really enjoying it. I really love how easy this writing is, and I actually don't mind what I will say how predictable the narrative is. I can see where it's coming. I know what's happening, and I think that it was almost revealed in the first death in this book. The way this person died, no one's really thought about it since, but it's always remained in the back of my mind. So I think I know what's happening, but I like that I'm aware and the characters are trying to figure it out, because that adds an additional layer to how self-referential this is, how meta the book is. Genuinely, it is so meta. He's a film writer who is now being targeted in real life by the horror monsters he's created, and now he's referring to himself as the protagonist of the story. And there's been a lot of anecdotes in which they discuss horror, not just film, but storytelling and all of these things. And you're seeing how these horror monsters were inspired by events in his life, because there have been flashbacks or just like memories to when he was younger. And I'm really enjoying how it's all tying together. So I'm totally fine with this being slightly predictable for me, because I can see why it is. I'm picking up the clues, the little things that are being dropped, the hints, the nods, and it's showing to me that this is a well-crafted narrative, because the author is purposely doing that, is providing this experience so that when it comes to the end, we shouldn't be surprised, because he literally made this a beautiful formula. So I'm having a good time with it so far, and I probably will be binging it in the next couple days. So yeah, and then we'll only have one book left, which is The Z Word. At this point, I am neck deep in horror, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way. I'm having such a good time with this vlog, and as you know, I finished Cackle the last time I updated you, and I have decided to give it a 3.5. That is because I can see that it has a strong place in the horror and just autumnal season in general, why it is very accessible to various types of horror readers, whether you're a newbie or you're someone who reads the most grisly things but also enjoys the cozy autumnal vibes of a witch in a small town. I had a great time when I was reading it, and I can see that even though I wasn't enamored by it, I wasn't as obsessed as some people, I could reread it, could re-listen to it, especially if I want to get into the fall season in future years. So a strong start to the vlog, but I've already read a better one, and that is Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze. And by better, I just mean it worked way better for me. I really loved this book. I had so much fun with the cast of characters, how meta it really was. Our main character, Misha, has to look into his own career in the horror field, specifically in the film industry, as well as his friends' connections to it, how his past has influenced the monsters he's created, the ghosts that he's had to kind of deal with in his own past, so that he can move forward and just be a stronger, better person for himself, but also for his loved ones. I also really loved the ending. There was a particular scene in which a certain representation that is very underrepresented comes to the forefront and does this really iconic action, and I felt seen. I was very, very happy to see it, and I just, it was so great. And at first I was thinking about just giving it a 4-star, which is a great rating, by the way. A 4-star is honestly something I would recommend to everyone, but that one scene, it got me to a 4.25 because I was like, okay, we aren't playing around here, Chuck Tingle. I see you seeing me and I really appreciate it. The reason why it's not a 5-star is just because I felt as though some of the dialogue was a bit heavy-handed, and I know it's metafictional. I know that the whole point is to poke at the genre, to ask questions, to give a critique, to kind of joke around with the audience that is consuming this literature. But some of it I just felt like was just a bit too played up, a bit too hallmarky at times too. But I very much respect where the author is coming from, especially trying to provide this idea of a happy ending, even in the darkest of narratives, the darkest of genres being horror. So yeah, 4.25, it was so fun, and I definitely recommend it. The audio was great too. It actually enhanced my reading experience. But as I said, being neck deep, I have added a bonus book that I am reading for this vlog, and that is How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. This is actually a surprise author for me. I have never read anything by him before, and I'm actually already halfway. I've been speeding through this as well, mainly because both of these are borrowed from the library and I need to return them ASAP so that others can enjoy it in anticipation of the fall season, trying to rack up some of their own horror vibes before we even get colder weather, which I'm starting to see actually, which is very lovely. It's a bit cooler, a bit breezier in my area, and oh my gosh, it couldn't start soon enough. But back to this, the reason why it's also a bit of a surprise for me is because I decided to look up the author just to look at his backstory, get to know him a little bit better because I'd never heard of him before. I wasn't even sure if this was a debut. It's very clearly not a debut. I realized that he has a title on his list that I have seen someone else read. And it's the person who inspired me to do this kind of cozy-ish vlog where I'm just continuing with my life, letting you know what books I'm reading. And that is Kirsten. Kirsten, the reading nymph, ended up reading another book by Craig DeLuise for Battle of the Booktubers, episode 13. And I was like, this is insane. The way that I understand episode 13 is that this is a completely different vibe. I would not have expected these two books to be by the same author, especially because this one is so humorous. You can tell that the author does not expect you to take anything seriously and just watch these characters as they're making foolish decisions. And again, participating in that most common element of horror where we tell these characters, don't open that door, don't follow that noise, and we know they're going to do it anyways. I am predicting this to be such a train wreck, and I'm totally here for it. I'm really enjoying the humor about it and the fact that there is yet again this deep knowledge in the horror film industry, just like Chuck Tingle. But for Craig DeLuise, this is set in the 80s, so you can tell the vibe is very different, whereas this one's a bit, you know, current, modern day, even near future-esque. So I'm appreciating the fact that we've got two similar ideas taken in completely different directions, and I am just cackling. I'm having such a good time with this one. It follows this director, Max Maury, and he has a dream. His dream is to make horror as terrifying as possible. He believes it shouldn't be enjoyable. He believes it shouldn't be digestible by, you know, the masses, audience members who appreciate all genres. He thinks that this really should actually horrify people, and people shouldn't be laughing, shouldn't be enjoying the tropes, the formulaic elements that we expect in horror, especially when it comes to certain franchises. He has just come out with a third film in his franchise, Jack the Knife. Is that what it's called? Jack the Knife. So Jack the Knife 3 has just hit theaters, and he is furious because it is doing so well. Everyone's enjoying themselves, laughing, rooting for the killer, which we have seen in other franchises, Scream, Halloween, I could go on, and he realizes he's done something wrong. He has fallen into the mainstream media, and that's the last thing he wants to do. Certain circumstances align, and he has in his possession this camera that is linked to one of the most ultimate tragedies in horror film history, and he decides to use it for his next project. He is going to record his next big horror break with this cursed camera, but he realizes soon that whatever he records, whoever he records, terrible things happen. These people end up experiencing horror in real life. There are deaths. And halfway through, we've had a couple of people already perish. And now he's kind of coming to grips with, should I continue with my project? And then knowing what's going to happen? Or should I try to destroy this evil camera? There's also a character called Sally Priest, and she has a dream of being a final girl. She wants to be among the scream queens of history, and I really like her character. I find her really interesting. She's very humorous, and she is dealing with this idea of being a method actor, trying to play the role while also just surviving in Hollywood, knowing how creepy certain directors are, how others are succumbing to drugs or falling into certain stereotypes, certain casting expectations, and I find her really interesting. Yeah, a complete surprise, unintentional, and I have no idea how this is gonna end, but I'm very excited to be in this journey with these characters and, I don't know, see if they actually do survive the making of this horror movie. I love that I thought I could read these 4 books in 1 week. In 1 month, to be honest. I did start this in August. It's beginning of September, so it really hasn't been a month yet, but I'm just laughing at myself. It's fine. I'm still working out the kinks of how to actually organize a weekly vlog and get what I need to get done completed. So I can't remember the last time I updated you where I was at, but I am confirming that I finished How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive, and I really enjoyed this. I don't think it's similar to other books by this author. I've never read anything by Craig DeLuise before, but it does feel as though he's gone in a different direction, and I'm not mad about it. I'm not sure how his tried and true big fans feel about this, but I thought this was super funny. I love the social commentary. It definitely fits camp horror because it's really self-referential. There's a lot of body horror. There are a lot of bodies piling up throughout the book, but you're okay with it because you're just along for the ride. These characters are doing crazy things, and I just really had a fun time. I actually am wondering if this book is going to rise in my rating the further I get away from it, because I gave it a straight 4 stars when I finished, but I could see myself continuing to think about this, returning to this novel, and just appreciating it more and more for its tone, its atmosphere, for the crazy cast of characters that we get, and for the very satisfying ending. I found that for numerous characters, whether I were rooting for them or rooting against them, they received endings that I thought they deserved, that I thought was fitting, and it just made me sit in the end with this book being like, ah, yes, this was tied up with a nice bow in such a great way. So yeah, I can definitely recommend this one for those of you who are trying camp horror out, because it was just a fun time. Very humorous, very gory, but totally worth the gore for like the social commentary and the journey you go on with these kind of silly but purposefully silly characters. And then, without even one mid-book update, I also completed the Z Word. This was such a fast read, though, to be honest. It's only about 250 pages. I finished it today, but started it yesterday. I got to maybe a third of the way through the book yesterday, and then during my Tuesday sprints for Mystic Readathon, because that's the readathon I'm participating in this month, I was able to finish it in just 3 sprints. So you can tell it's a very quick novel, and I was not mad about it. I actually had a great time talking about it on screen. I had a bunch of people on with me. There was Margaret and Paco and Vanessa, and it was just a really great time. So it was lovely to enjoy this book while also enjoying the company I had with me during those sprints. This ends up following, yes, a zombie apocalypse, but in a slightly different lens. It's viewed from a different perspective. It is before the apocalypse begins. Our characters are all at this party celebrating the beginning of Pride Month, preparing for other festivities for the Pride Parade, and our main character, Wendy, is feeling so-so about the experience. She recently broke up with her girlfriend, who's also at the party. She's feeling very self-conscious about her place within this community, feeling as though, or at least wondering who her friends actually are, because a lot of them are obviously friends with her ex-girlfriend, Leah, and so she's not really sure she should even be at this party, but she does want to celebrate Pride as well. So she ends up arriving, the party gets a little bit crazy. You're starting to see some signs of people acting strangely. It doesn't kick in until the next day when people just start eating each other and becoming extremely violent, incoherent, and seeming to act without even thinking about the consequences. And we then have this band of characters, this group trying to survive and also find answers to what's going on. Wendy, her ex, ends up being roped into this too, along with a drag queen, Logan, and a few other characters who just try to figure out what's happening in San Lazaro in Arizona. I liked the setting of this specifically. I feel as though I don't read too many books that are set in the Southwest, and it is extremely hot, so that also adds to the tension, you know. Emotions are flying wild. People are just sweating, trying to get out of the heat, and you're trying to explain to yourselves why we're getting these mass mentions of people killing people by eating them or being infected by a bite. So I thought that it was really fun, and there's some really great social commentary on the queer community, on them being used as pawns oftentimes in political battles, in marketing, corporations taking advantage of the Pride community, especially during Pride Month, how all of the advertisements are suddenly showing off the rainbow colors, and you're just like, well, where are you the other 11 months supporting our communities? Nowhere to be seen. So I thought that was really interesting. There are a couple mentions of historical events, obviously Stonewall, but other riots or mass shootings too, because we are in the climate that we're in. So there are some topical things about the last 5-10 years that we've also seen, specifically in the United States. I do need to warn some people that it does get a bit steamy. There are some sex scenes in here that I wasn't expecting, and I think that is something that's quite common in books that are very queer forward. And by queer forward, I just mean that they are designed to emphasize the importance of queer lives, of queer futures, of queer love. And I was totally here for it. I really enjoyed the group of characters. Yes, there were some oddities within the narrative, some crazy plot lines, and certain elements in the end were just kind of wacky, but I think that adds to the point that this is very much a camp horror novel. And I'm just always here for like a zombie book, because I feel like we have left the zombie era, but I'm not mad about the idea of us coming back to it. So I ended up giving this a solid 4 stars as well, and I definitely would be willing to try this author again. Lindsay King Miller, not sure if she has any other books on the horizon, but I'll be keeping an eye out. And yes, that means I've had a very successful vlog, which is so great. All 4 books were positive. My lowest rated book was Cackle, giving that a 3.5 stars. I gave these 2 books 4 stars, and then Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle I gave 4.25. So if you're interested in getting into camp horror and you don't know where to start, I think you could start with any 4 of these. I would say the campiest is actually How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. Then it follows with The Z Word. Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze is less campy, even though it does have some hallmark mentions and there is some humor throughout. And then finally, the reason why I think Cackle is the least camp is because I actually think it's cozy. It's a cozy horror, and it definitely leans more into the realm of where we put like Suburban Hell as a cozy horror as well. That one's not camp, it's more cozy. So that's my thoughts about the matter. All right, thank you all so much for getting to the end of this vlog. I have no idea how long it took. I'm sure I kept the thumbnail I created, which said that this took a week. Sorry, I'm a liar. I thank you all to my Manor guests as well. You have been so supportive and such a fun time, especially with our monthly events. So thank you for continuing to support me, and I can't wait to enter the spooky season, maybe reading more camp horror with you all if the votes decide it. Oh, and thank you so much to Brittany from Rescues and Reads for gifting this to me. It was 100% worth the read, and I can't wait to cherish my copy. And every time I look at it, I'll be reminded that a friend gave this to me. So yeah, thank you so much, friend. On that note, I'm gonna leave you guys here, and I hope you have a lovely reading month, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!